New York and on the new Hot 97 app. Ebro in the morning on Hot 97.
Ebro in the morning, Laura Styles, wrestling. What are you doing, Rosenberg? You eating?
I was finishing my breakfast.
He's having cookies.
I didn't know you were starting yet.
We sit down in front of microphones. We put headphones on. The NYPD's here.
And I am wearing a wrestling tee.
You got that part right.
Sasha Banks.
There you go. Officer Monahan and Officer Tariq, give it up. The NYPD is here. Tariq, what's your last name? I just call you Tariq.
Shepard.
Tariq Shepard. Do you like Officer Shepard? Bring the mic closer to you, sir.
Tariq is good.
You like Officer Tariq. That's good.
Just Tariq.
The officer part, nah.
I love being an officer, but I mean, hey,
We know each other on first name
now.
basis, right? Okay. Let's start with you, Officer Monahan. You've been on the force how long?
Just over 35 years.
35 years, and your title is?
I'm the chief of patrol.
Which means what?
That means I'm in charge of all the uniformed officers in the city that work in each and every one of our precincts. I have around 17,000 cops that report directly to me.
And you're scheduling their, what do you mean report when you say that? Like,
I'm in charge. I'm in charge of that whole bureau of the police department. All the precincts, so their commanding officers report to a borough command, and that borough command reports to me. So we sort of set the tone for how we're going to police throughout the city.
And how would you say you've set the tone differently in 2017? Because I would say the city feels different. I would say since, the transition to Commissioner O'Neill, I would say even the turmoil of de Blasio and some of the challenges that we went through, the change in stop and frisk and some other things we'll get into, it feels different to me. But what have you done differently with your team?
The whole thing of patrol is the neighborhood policing philosophy that we're working under. It is a huge cultural change in the police department. We're talking to our cops, and we want them to connect with their communities, be part of it, take ownership of certain neighborhoods. So we're keeping those same cops in that neighborhood every day. For years, I was having cops work one end of a precinct one day, the other end the next, and maybe going to Yankee Stadium for a game after that, or sitting on a prisoner somewhere. We want the same cops working in the same neighborhood every day so they get to know the people, get to know the 99% of good people that are in that community, and be able to identify that 1% of a criminal element that's out there causing havoc within the community.
What was the impetus for this? Does it have anything to do with, Eric Garner's situation, for example, was something where we talked about knowing the community? I know they knew Eric before he passed to some degree. But tell us, were there other things? What was the impetus for sort of this version of patrolling?
In 2014, we all know what was going on, not only in the city but nationally. We had the Garner incident. You had Ferguson. You had tremendous protests throughout the streets. 25,000 people marching down the street. Very negative against the police. Very anti-police sentiment that was going out there. Culminates into the assassination of two of our officers, Detectives Lou and Ramos. At that point in time, morale for the police department was as low as it could get. There was a real disconnect between our cops that are out there every day and the communities that they served. We needed to change, and we needed to change quickly. So we devised this system, this neighborhood policing, this philosophy that we were going to work under. And we had to do it, and we had to do it quickly, but we had to do it right. So we couldn't just come up with a system and say, hey, the entire city is going to do this today. This is a cultural change. It takes time.
Was it hard to deliver that message? Because I would imagine whenever there's turmoil and whenever there's a random attack that happens on any group, the natural reaction is to strike back with vitriol and anger and no nonsense. Was it hard for you to say, hey, this horrible thing just happened, but we need to look at ourselves and think, like, what can we do differently to start changing things?
We knew it. The sentiment was out there. I spent my entire career on patrol with cops and understanding what a cop wants. The whole change here was very easy for us to bring to the cops. This is what the patrol officers wanted to do. They didn't want to go out there and have to blanket a community with arrests or summonses. They wanted to interact. They wanted to have discretion, which is something that we talk about all the time now. And that was the main change. Probably the hardest thing we had to do was...
What does discretion mean? Sorry.
That means an officer can go
in this case.
An officer on the scene, if he sees someone, he has that decision. Whatever the quality of life issue, whatever the problem is, he has discretion. What's best? What is the best way for him to handle it? He's on that street every day. He's on 183 in Walton every single day. He knows, do I need to make an arrest to resolve this issue? Do I need to give a summons? Or is there another way that I can come up with to resolve it? I'm sitting in headquarters. I don't know best 183 and Walton Avenue better than that cop who's down there every day, dealing with that community every day. We have to give that cop discretion to resolve the problems. We need problems resolved. We need quality of life issues dealt with. But we have to have faith in our cops that are out there every day to be able to come up with the best way to resolve that. And that's the change that we undertook.
In there, though, is, I guess, what could be seen as someone having the discretion to also be an asshole, right? And also create problems. So how would you manage that if you have somebody who is on the ground in a neighborhood, and that, like we're seeing with the 42nd Precinct in the South Bronx and the big story in the headlines and the guy David Terrell, which he's been on the force and has his badge taken or whatever, that's being investigated, right? But this is somebody that was doing things on the ground in a community. People were complaining and nothing was happening. How are you going to manage that moving forward?
With the David Terrell issue, again, that's active lawsuits and everything else. I don't want to talk specifically about Dave, but I will talk a bit about the 4-2 precinct. There are a lot of issues within the 4-2 precinct that we had to deal with. Big gang issues in the 4-2 precinct. When you look at it, I can name off the top of my head 5 or 6 different gangs: Lyman Boys, Hilltop, Washside, B Road, FOE, Mac Ballers, young kids running around with guns, shooting one another. And in the 4-2 precinct, if you look at that violence that was taking place, we had 3 innocent kids shot over the course of the years. We had Veda Vasquez, we had Lloyd Morgan, and we had Dasheen Hunter recently just shot. Innocent kids hit by that stray bullet. So there's a lot of that going back and forth of we can handle it ourselves. But
when you say who's we?
This is kids on the street.
Thinking they can handle their problems themselves.
Quite often we deal with it. Someone who gets shot, and we ask them what happened, who did it. Don't worry, I'll take care of it myself. And that's that circle of violence that we really need to interrupt. And that's what this is all about, trying to get into these kids, get into their mindset that we need to change. Someone has to be that one, have the guts to stand forward and say, we need to get that 1 or 2 people in the neighborhood who are willing to pull out a gun and shoot somebody and put them away.
And you feel like it always is 1 or 2?
Every crew, every gang, there's normally only a couple of guys in that gang who are willing to pull the trigger. But the more they're out there, they influence others to say, hey, I want to be like that guy. But if we can get someone to stand up and get those couple of guys, those trigger men out of there, that makes all the difference. And that's what our whole precision policing aspect is about, identifying those couple of guys who are willing to pull a trigger and removing them from society so it doesn't influence the other 90% of kids that are out there.
But to Ebro's point, we can't talk specifically about the Terrell case, but what do? You start hearing, and this time moving forward, that there's an officer who's exhibiting behavior that it sounds like from the community is not right. How do you guys handle that moving forward?
Obviously, as soon as we get an allegation, our internal affairs is going to look at it. We have Commissioner Joe Resnick. I don't know if any of you know Joe Resnick. He's a 40-year veteran in the police department, homicide detective. He would handle every major police shooting that ever happened. He's been running the Internal Affairs Bureau right now. He's the sort of guy, if I was doing something wrong, I certainly wouldn't want him looking at us, looking at me. But he would get a case. We would get, just 1 second before, he would get the case to follow up. But the key thing for a lot of this is that we need those witnesses who are saying things on a street corner to come forward and talk to us, talk to our Internal Affairs Bureau, and tell us what they've said in other times. Because we don't decide these cases in the media. We need to do an investigation, and you have to be willing to come forward either to our Internal Affairs Bureau, to the District Attorney's Office, or even to a federal if you don't have faith in that. But someone has to come forward and be willing to take that next step if there is a negative cop out there to give us the information. Same as we look at as a shooter.
You know, when someone says someone's been on a job for 40 years, right? That, for me, that's when I get worried. That's when I go, wait a minute. So this guy's been a part of something when things were not, especially for a black man, in my favor. So if I start seeing, when I start hearing those terms, this is me. I become like, well, you're an inside guy. You're doing the investigations, right? So are you really going to be as purposeful about rectifying culture and changing culture as someone who would be new?
You got to look at the person. Again, I've been doing this for 35 years, and I'm an agent for changing this. This is something I've seen I want to change, and the results that we're getting is absolutely tremendous. Someone like Joe Resnick, again, you got to look at who that person is. This was a man, he was in charge of the squad up in the 3-4 years ago. I don't know if you remember the Baby Hope capes, where they found this young child in a cooler. He was the guy who continued that investigation for over 15, 20 years till we finally caught the person that did that. He's the one with his men that paid for the funeral, put the tombstone up. This is someone who's always cared about the community and did that. So you can't look at how many years a person is. You got to look at the person. Understand, and this is the same message I give out about all our cops. We're all human. We all have individual personalities. And understand, it's not all blue. It's not everyone you see in a uniform is the same. Every cop has an individual personality. And granted, there are definitely some cops that aren't good, that we have to remove, and we do. We fire cops on a regular basis.
Well, I don't think that gets covered, by the way. Well, since you brought that up, we talk about it on the air. I'll be like, oh, they got another one up out of there. This one was selling drugs, or 12 of them got busted on this, and these guys been on the job for 20 years. But I don't really think it gets as much coverage as, I guess, I would like to see it.
Well, not as much as an active cop doing something bad and not getting in trouble.
Right.
It's almost like I know you guys, it's an interesting relationship too, because you don't want to be like, guess what? Look who we blew out. But at the same time, it's like you wish it was like the NFL, and it's like released, because that is important, because a lot of people don't think that bad cops ever get released, because it kind of gets quiet.
I would say you guys fired probably 20 cops in the last 18 months that I can remember.
I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's probably even more than that. Cops they get fired for all sorts of different violations. We have 36,000 uniformed members of the service here. Out of 36,000, there are going to be people that mess up, and we get them out as quickly as we can. Because every good cop doesn't want a bad cop sitting next to him.
Do you feel like inside the NYPD, people are holding on to the past, or generally happy to move forward into a new space?
Oh, I see a lot of happiness in what we're doing, especially with the cops who are out there every day. We have a much younger patrol force. We had a patrol force that may not have been happy with the way we were policing back in the early 2000s up into 2014 to these changes. But when we underwent the change to neighborhood policing, the cops in these commands, they say it's about time. They are the ones that are happiest of the change. They wanted this change. It's a great system of where they know how to move up. If you want to move up within the command to eventually become a neighborhood coordination officer, you have to go through that steady sector, a response car. There's a goal for them to go. And you're learning the way to move up is to resolve crime and issues with the community. It's not about locking up everyone. It's about locking up that guy who's causing the violence in that neighborhood.
Tariq, what is your title?
I'm a lieutenant.
And can you talk about, because we've had this conversation before, I firmly believe that most of us walking the street, we look at police as not only police, but a part of the government. And for the average everyday person that comes across a police officer, if Donald Trump's doing something, it's your fault, right? If de Blasio's doing something, you guys are a part of the you guys, but you guys are always in neighborhoods. Can you articulate to what degree that joblessness, bad schools, high rent prices, gentrification falls kind of in the lap of people just working in the neighborhood, being an officer?
Yeah, well, as we talked about before, even with the crime reductions in the city, we know that it's not all just police. We have some of the things that you mentioned, gentrification, but you look at a place like the Bronx, where there may not be as much money being spent in the Bronx to redevelop, and everybody's not moving into the Bronx. We're still seeing the crime reductions taking place in even those neighborhoods. So obviously this is more than just one thing at a time, reducing crime, one thing at a time, causing all these things to happen. But when you mention Donald Trump, and when you mention us being looked at just as the police in general, you have to look at the NYPD and what's happening here, because we see incidents taking place all around the country, but that's not our city. What's happening in our city is we have a lot more people looking at what we're doing, interacting with our cops, but also seeing that this is not just dialogue. One of the reasons we reached out to you is because we wanted to get a message out to a younger group of people so they understand that the things that we're doing are genuine and they're working. You know, it's not like we're doing all of this, what they call community policing or whatever it may be, and allowing the city to be unsafe. We have the safest major city in the world. And we're still doing that while we increase the relationships with the community. So I don't think we can fix every problem. When we talked before about emotionally disturbed and when we talked before about some of the other issues that cops deal with on a daily basis, the cops can't solve every problem. But we're doing the best we can to train them to be ready for as many things as they'll see out there.
In what ways do you guys think you could be more communicative about things in progress? Because I know that's tough, right? The David Terrell thing is something in progress. And for the people watching, listening right now, that's the guy we've talked about who worked at the 42nd Precinct in the Bronx. What's the young kid's name? Pedro Hernandez, who recently got his case dismissed. But the officer, David Sorrell, according to the story, allegedly, was giving this kid a hard time because Pedro's mom basically didn't want to have sex with him, is the way the story goes. And there was other women that made similar complaints about this officer, and he was giving these young kids a hard time, putting them in jail, and there was kids getting charges. In what ways can you guys be more communicative about progress?
Listen, this is it's important for us to be able to talk about it. We have to talk about it generally. I can't talk about the specifics of each case, but it just in general, you know, when something's put in the media, it doesn't make it 100% true. I've said this to you before, I believe. There's two sides to every story, and somewhere there within the middle lies the truth, and that's what we have to do. We can't argue a case in the media. We could talk about that we're going to investigate it, that we're going to step forward, we're going to look. We want to get people to come forward and talk to us. But we have to do that. We can't just say, he's a liar, because there's
of course
truth.
You can.
Right, there's truth to everything.
Well,
there's
even
some
when
truth
you
in
called in when we first got wind of the page, you jumped
Right.
on the phone, no problem. You was like, look, we are dealing with the facts being presented on Pedro Hernandez. There's a charge that got dropped, and there's another court case. There's 2 charges against him. And you said, look, we're going to investigate it. We're being supplied information, and that's what you have to go on, right? So you have the Bronx DA, who's being also accused in some of this controversy. You have this officer, David Terrell, and now we have a kid, Pedro Hernandez, who got all his charges dropped, but his life is forever changed because he spent a year in Rikers, which, you know, that is problematic. People aren't going to just gloss over that.
Right. And let me just, again, I'm not going to speak specifically about this case, but in general, things that happen, how investigations kind of move forward. Listen, we talked about this. We get people in, we talk to people. I told you, we lock someone up. The best thing to do is to buy them a soda and a bag of chips, sit them in the room, and we start talking, just like we're talking. And people will tell us stuff. They'll tell us who's involved, who's doing this, who's doing that. Believe it or not, the majority of people who come in are willing to talk because I think they want troublemakers out of the neighborhood. But that next step comes, hey, are you willing to go and testify to that? And that's when it's all bets are off.
You guys can't keep me safe.
Exactly. Listen, that's all bets off on a lot of times. That's some of the problems. We have to develop cases based on information that we already know and then try and go through whatever other means, video, DNA, whatever it is to take, to eventually see if a witness is willing to step forward. And a lot of times they may step forward for that grand jury, which is a couple of days or so after an incident. But when you're talking a year, 2 years later, when someone's going to trial and they're back in their neighborhood, and now you got everyone coming up to them, hey, are you going to say this? Are you going to say that? There's a tendency to back out. And that's what happens on a lot of cases. They may end up getting sealed as it's getting closer towards trial time because witnesses have now changed their minds about coming forward and testifying. It is a common thing. So for us, we have to prove a case with the DAs beyond a reasonable doubt. Once there's a reasonable doubt, we have to seal that case.
But I guess what I'm getting to with you is an officer that you're managing presents that this guy did XYZ crime, right?
Right.
The district attorney's job, I don't completely understand, but if the officer said that this happened, they're going on the facts of that officer.
No.
That's not how it's going.
Man, that would make it a lot easier for us, I think. But no, absolutely not. You need a lot of proof. The DA will take every case as it comes in, and they want to see, you know, great, we may have probable cause. That's what we work off of, that he probably did this crime.
He probably did. Rosenberg probably.
Depends what the crime is.
So We bring it in and we present the evidence that we have to the district attorney. They now will take that evidence and they're going to make a pre-arraignment determination of whether or not we're going to go forward. Once they make it, all right, he has probable cause, let's see what we can do, move this forward. It goes to a grand jury. 20 people sitting there. The evidence that we have is now presented to this grand jury. They have to make a determination. And the defendant has every right at that grand jury to go in there and state their side of the case. At that point, they vote whether or not they believe there's enough probable cause to present this case further down the trial. Once indicted, now everything, the defense attorneys are going to go out, they're going to get all the evidence that we have, and it's their job to go out there and see if they can create a reasonable doubt within that evidence that we have. They will go out there, they'll talk to witnesses that are involved in the case and see if they can get a different story. And that's how it evolves to the point of trial. And at a trial, it is the state's responsibility to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. If that jury has any doubt so-and-so did it, the case is dismissed or found not guilty. Never means he's 100% innocent, but we can't prove for 100% that this person did it. It's better to let that person out than to go forward on someone that you can't prove 100%.
And then you have that, which people don't trust the relationship between the DA and the cops, so there's mistrust there. You have the bail system, which there's a whole controversy around the bail system being a racket too. And then you have the layer of the fact that people from poor communities can't get proper representation and feel like they're under attack sometimes. And so the reason I'm bringing all of these layers up is because you guys have a lot to deal with in changing the perception of a system that you guys didn't personally create, but that you're beholden to and have sworn to uphold. And I guess what I want to hear from you guys today is that this cultural change that we're talking about is something that we're going to stick to moving forward, because we can't change the past. We can try to fix up a few things, but Tariq is smiling. Something you want to say?
No, well, I mean, going back to what you said earlier, how we're going to communicate more, just us being here is a testament to that. What we're doing tonight with Hot 97 over at on 20th Street, having that town hall type style meeting.
Who's on that panel? Fat Joe,
Jimani Williams from Brooklyn. We're going to have Chief Monahan, and then we're going to have one of our cops from Brooklyn North, a 2-year officer who was hired right after the times that we're talking about right now. He's hired probably around January 2015, coming off of Ferguson and Eric Garner. And one of the reasons that he was selected was because Lisa wanted to talk to him about his mindset of taking his job as a young officer after all these things were going on, the massive protests and everything. He was dropping the application as all that was happening. So to get inside his thought pattern as that was going on.
He decided to sign up.
Right.
So look, I'm gonna keep grinding y'all about the David Terrell till we get some answers. I'm gonna just be honest, because I think that is a very I mean, it's like a fucking movie. Like, you got to be honest. The way and I know you guys can't speak, but if you read up on it, it is like something out of a movie that is happening in our city. Other things, there was a $75 million lawsuit I read about that was 900,000 bogus arrests, and the NYPD paid out $75 million to a class action lawsuit. I don't know if you guys know details of this. This might not even be on your radar. Tariq, you seem to...
Chief Monahan can address it. We talked about this when Sean King came in.
Okay.
Yeah, these weren't arrests. These were summonses that were issued. Summonses, so the person was never brought in handcuffs, never arrested. It was a settlement that we had with the city, with the people. These were summonses that a judge found factually insufficient. That it could be anything that on the summons itself, they forgot to put the person's date of birth, forgot to put his address, didn't write the story. So all those summonses, then the judge, at one point there was an agreement between legal and us that we would settle the lawsuit with the people. The judges had dismissed all those.
And is that the same as the dismissed 640 warrants, or that's different?
That's completely different. These are people that were given warrants, hadn't been arrested in over 10 years. So nothing had happened within 10 years. That person never returned on that warrant within 10 years. So the district attorney's offices all made a decision that they were going to dismiss those summonses. Because after 10 years, if they hadn't been in trouble, hadn't been brought before the system again for what would have been these were all what we call SAP warrants. These are C summonses for something like drinking in the street or urinating in the street, things of that nature.
Almost got one of those.
You gotta watch out.
The urinating in the street one?
Yeah, why not?
I had to go real bad.
We drink
Yo,
a lot
I'm
of water.
stuck here at the Holland Tunnel, B. I drink a lot of water.
I know,
need to pee.
I know.
Like, it's a problem. Listen, that should be an out for one of those summonses. The traffic and construction in the city, if I got to jump out and go pee, and then everybody won't let you use the bathroom at the restaurants unless you're a customer, it's a problem.
It's very
You got to pee. But I appreciate you guys coming on today, and we're going to have a lot more conversations. And those of y'all watching this, I'm sure we're going to see in the comments, some grievances towards the NYPD, but you guys are saying that you're open to have this dialogue and continue to improve the communication.
We have to talk. That's the only way we move forward as a city. Listen, we've done tremendous things starting working in neighborhood policing. If we can continue this dialogue, get rid of the rhetoric on both sides, and just talk things out. We may not always agree. Definitely not going to always agree, but we have to talk about it.
I'm glad you said that. Definitely not always agree, because I sent some tweets, and Tariq's like, yo, why are you, what are we doing?
I already don't agree.
Yo, B, I ain't heard from you in the last 5 minutes. NYPD was good.
Don't worry, that's very Ebro. He'll do that to us, too.
I'll be like, yo, where everybody at? Yo, we was sleeping. What's going on? It's midnight.
Well, one of the things about it is Ebro is fair. And so one of the things when we look for people who we want to reach out to, one of the things we say about you is always, with the way you comment on things, the way you view things, you try and bring a fair perspective. And that's what we want. And that's why we're willing to come and do the show and even talk to you sometimes without the microphones and cameras.
Yeah, for sure. I think, one of the things that's special, and you guys pointed it out, and you've pointed this out, Rosenberg, we live in New York City, the most populated city in America and one of the largest cities in the world. And we have the heads, we've had conversations with the commissioner and I don't think that happens between young people and specifically hip-hop music and street culture, if you will, for lack of a better term, in other communities and other cities as frequently as it probably should, where, I feel like most police precincts or departments have an us versus them mentality, meaning like what we say goes, here's the rules, that's that, and if you don't like it, so the fuck what, right? Like,
no, and I think this could open the door to other people, because a lot of other stations see our content and in their market think, you know what, maybe we should just have the police come in and do an interview and talk. And this is such an important time. We are living in a time where it's a very interesting time, where people are getting separated more than ever. So I think it's so important that we, like you said, that we try to have these communications. And you're right, definitely not going to always agree. And there are going to be times you turn on the radio and you're like, damn, they're roasting us today. But there are going to be times, I promise you, where if something good happens, we'll be the first ones to point it out and be like, hey, NYPD did this, and we appreciate that. So we appreciate you guys making time.
This illegal U-turn I made up on the
block.
So
man, we'll see y'all later. Good talking to you.
Give it up, NYPD.
Thank you, man.